We think that the more that partners and family, friends, neighbors of people who work in the sterile processing industry are engaged by what is happening with the films that we make, the more likely that positive changes can happen, as well as people just making informed decisions for themselves and loved ones. Like the informed consent piece that we talk about a lot in the Beyond Clean team has really taken root for me personally, having had someone very close to me having been impacted by a surgical site infection.
From the basement to the boardroom, from ideas to innovation, you are listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are pushing the sterile processing industry forward. Each week, you will encounter diverse perspectives from subject matter experts across the country and around the globe. Frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs, with a common goal to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we are glad you are here. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
On this episode of Beyond Clean, we speak with the Ankrum brothers, producers with Beyond Clean Media. Aaron Ankrum spent years recording and touring, as well as producing albums for performers ranging from young independent bands to Grammy-nominated artists. The do-it-yourself nature of being an independent artist and producer, from project management to conceptualization and producing music videos, made adding film work to his studio a natural transition. He serves as a director and creative director alongside his brother Christian, with whom he spent many years performing both in the studio and on the road, experiences that dovetailed nicely into their chemistry in film production. And Christian, after spending most of his life as a professional bassist, has spent the last 5 years widening his expertise. With a background in finance, ventures have pushed Christian into different small business opportunities, from real estate to an African busing company. He shares a love of the NBA with myself and stepped in as chaplain for the Minnesota Timberwolves in this last shortened season. After spending time in the audio world, there was a natural move to video production and creating e-learning content, as well as helping others tell a story. So with Aaron specializing for years in audio production and their years of experience together, the Ankrum brothers have found their stride and their attention to detail in the sterile processing industry. Mike, I've spent a lot of one-on-one time with these gentlemen and gotten to know them over the last year. We've done a number of video productions, including Beyond the Tour, which is designed to highlight the sterile processing industry, not only giving it recognition within healthcare, but really trying to expand awareness beyond healthcare and to the general public. And we're continuing to schedule recordings to round out that first season. So I'm excited to share their perspectives on educating in different types of media, which really is the wave of the future.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So I'm excited to hear their perspective because they are outsiders. So this is a very different kind of interview, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that, you know, this is really about bringing attention to sterile processing in a format that is going to appeal to other outsiders. And I think that one of the things that most sterile processing professionals really want is the recognition of the outside world, right? We've been too insulated for too long. And I really think that this particular skill set that the Ankrum brothers bring to the table is critical for that. And honestly, they're just fun to work with.
You're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now are the Ankrum brothers, Aaron and Christian, producers with Beyond Clean Media, for a very interesting and different interview that we're going to have today. But listen, gentlemen, you've been doing some really great work with Beyond Clean Media. We're going to talk about that in the interview, but also one of the things that it really makes you special is the way you just dove into the sterile processing industry. So I'm excited to get into that in the interview, but also just introduce you to our listeners because they've seen your work, but they haven't met you. And I wish they could hang out with you for a little bit because you're really a ton of fun to be around when we're on site filming for a day or two in a row. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last year or so. So maybe starting with Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Justin.
And Christian, maybe you could talk a little bit about which one of you is older and what that family dynamic was like. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us. Yeah, Aaron is the older brother. He's also got about half a foot in height on me. So he just kind of the obvious older brother, I always think, but I'm getting a little more gray these days, so every once in a while it flip-flops.
Older doesn't always mean more mature. Let me just say that. Aaron, would you agree?
There's a lot of truth to that, Justin.
All right, so let's dive into sterile processing. Why don't you tell us about how you became involved in this industry? Because you've been doing it for a while. You've done productions for not only Beyond Clean Media, but also for Isham. So anybody who's gone to the annual conference and expo has also seen some of your work, including the work that you've done with us on Beyond the Tour and some other promo videos. But how did you even find your way here?
Man, yeah, a few years ago, we were working with Lindsay Brown. We all live in Minneapolis. And so before she joined Beyond Clean, we were helping her create educational content for the company she was with. And then she's obviously just amazing to work with and super supportive. And she just kept giving us referral after referral and kind of letting us piggyback along with her to wherever she was going until a huge amount of what we were doing was in the sterile processing field. And it's funny that listening to literal hours of educational content was our introduction to the industry, because even though we didn't know it at the time, it was really giving us a great baseline understanding for what we were about to be like completely immersed in.
So thinking about then that sort of initial introduction, I'm curious what your observations are being an outsider, because I still very much remember my first time in a sterile processing department when I had first interviewed for a job. I really kind of felt like sterile processing, from my perception as a complete outsider, was, I described it as two dudes in a dishwasher. That's what it had to be like. And then I go on this department tour and it's like 60 plus people, multiple autoclaves, 3 shifts, and it was like a whole different world just opened up. So tell us about what your observations are as a complete outsider.
Yeah, I think similarly, you think it's simple at the outset, and then you realize that the concept is simple, but in reality, it's this endless journey into continually making care better. At every level, the people involved, from the techs to the hospital systems and everyone in between, they need to be performing at the highest level. And even if there's one weak link in the chain, that can subvert the efforts of everyone else.
It's a fascinating industry to me because its visibility to the public is just minuscule in relation to its importance. Like, it'd be hard to find anyone who hasn't been impacted in some way, like for better or worse, by a surgical outcome, whether it's them or a loved one. But the understanding of what goes into sterilizing the equipment used in that surgery is, for the most part, almost zero. And that relationship between like the public awareness of sterile processing and what it is and the real life impact of what it is are, to me, completely inverse.
And so I'm sure that there are ways for you to take a look at what is going on in the industry, et cetera, and relate it to your own experiences. But other than certification, in many cases, there's not a formal training, although there are some schools, and we're seeing more and more of that. But even as you developed your careers, did you have formal training in audio, visual, and artwork, or is this something that just kind of evolved for you and you trained yourself or got mentorship? How did that happen for you, and maybe how does it relate to what you learned about sterile processing?
Together, Aaron and I have continually educated each other. From an early age, I feel like there was this need to kind of learn on our own and learn how we learn. And from our background, we started in the audio side. We were in a band together for a long time. And the things that taught us were no one else is going to do it for you, so you have to learn it yourself. And all of our training has kind of been on-the-job training. It's pushed us to know that if there's a hurdle or something that we don't know, that we can do it either individually or together as a team.
I'm so glad you went to team, because that was my next question. Every time we've gone out filming, it's not just the two of you. You have a whole team developed. Drawing some parallels here between the sterile processing industry and what you're doing to shine a light on it. I think team building is a big aspect of that. So talk to us about how you built your team and how important that sense of team is, because you're typically on a time crunch. And that is definitely the same scenario in sterile processing. It's turn the trays around, get them back in for the next surgery. That you're on the clock, and you don't get a chance to do a redo once that set is up into the OR. And I think in many cases, you might do a couple of takes when you're filming, but you've only got so much time. And if you don't catch something, it's not easy for you to recreate that or do a second take. So talk about the pressure of that environment and how important it is to have a positive team dynamic.
Man, it's a great question. I think it's a fascinating conversation. When Christian's talking about our background, being in a band, I'll just start with that specifically. When we're touring with no budget, walking into not necessarily the best environments, different technical environments every night, you realize that even if your first instinct is to kind of panic and get stressed and push back when someone's bringing attitude or whatever, that panic doesn't help anything. And it brings a thick skin of knowing yourself well enough to stay relaxed in these moments, take a breath and just see the whole thing and know that being relaxed and kind is the best option in almost every scenario. And being in Minneapolis, there's a really big creative pool of people, and the people who have done well and stayed connected are people that follow that same mindset. So people like John Evans and Jake Larson, who we bring along for the Beyond the Tour, like those are guys that are people we connect with personally, people we trust to stay calm in the moment, to really do their job artistically, to treat people well. And that's an analytical view of it, but it's really more natural than that. That's just kind of how things come together as far as our working team goes.
Okay, so in a little bit, I want to talk about what it's like filming in a sterile processing department and those kinds of considerations, but we'll hold off for that a little bit, or maybe it can piggyback off this next question. But describing what goes into the right shot. So how much time does it take to record and edit like a 15-minute promo video like you've done for several of our customers? What is that like, and what's the ratio of setup time, takedown time, and editing time to actual film time?
I would say that the right shot can be a few different things. We can set up the shot perfectly and try to get it absolutely precise. And that can take half a day to a day sometimes if we're really honing in on a certain thing. But sometimes we can just be rolling on an interview or shooting some product, and the thing that we're going for just kind of pops in there unexpectedly. So you have the whole gamut. But when it comes to recording and editing a 15-minute, I was just thinking about this. You know when someone like takes a 10-minute video of their kid and they want to show it to you, and it's good for like the first 20 seconds? And I know that because I do that to other people all the time, even though I do video producing. But to make something compelling to a viewer, that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of planning on the front end, and it takes a lot of attention on the back end to make sure that each piece is intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. And that starts even before we start shooting. We're trying to identify and visualize the aesthetic and feel that is the most impactful and the most on brand for whoever we're shooting for. And then we're shooting with that end in mind. How we're lighting it, how we're framing it, what lens choice Christian's picking. Are we doing it in slow-mo, full speed? And then we're moving into the actual edit. Using that 15-minute edit, for example, we're going through hours and hours of footage, and sometimes we're looking at like 40 to 80 or more hours of human hours going into a 15-minute video. And I mean, Justin, you know from Beyond the Tour, it's rolling all the time and just capturing those moments, finding the right moment that tells a story that lets people know, why is this important? Why does it matter to me? And what is this company really about?
Yeah, it's amazing what sort of the democratization of video has done, in the sense that, you know, now everybody has a video recorder in their pockets, right? And it gives the perception that all you need to do for video is just open the app on your phone and start recording, right? Mm-hmm. But in reality, when we're talking about, you know, high quality productions, it's so much more than that. So I know that some of our listeners are probably sitting out there and they're thinking, this is a sterile processing podcast, and we're talking about video recording. Help us connect the dots on what is it that your skill base brings the value of improvements to the industry?
Yeah, bringing this back to sterile processing industry, we talked a little bit earlier about how this is an industry that on some levels has been invisible to the public at large. And for Christian and I, one thing we always have in the back of our mind as industry outsiders is that we want everything we make to be not only scientifically and substantially accurate, but also to do as much as we can to make it as compelling and digestible for people outside of the industry. It's challenging for sure because there's a ton of industry speak. I mean, the amount of acronyms we've learned in the last year is mind-boggling. But we think that the more that partners and family, friends, neighbors of people who work in the sterile processing industry are engaged by what is happening with the films that we make, the more likely that positive changes can happen, as well as people just making informed decisions for themselves and loved ones. Like the informed consent piece that we talk about a lot in the Beyond Clean team has really taken root for me personally, having had someone very close to me having been impacted by a surgical site infection.
So, Aaron, I realize that personal experience in many ways is very private, not only for you, but other people listening to the show that have had an experience with a surgical site infection. But do you want to talk maybe generally about that in any way and really highlight why this work is extra specially important to you?
Yeah, so a few years ago, one of the most important people in the world to me ended up needing a emergency surgery, and it was involving their stomach. And first I have to understand what the problem is. So it's like fire hosing, like, here's what the problem is, here's what we need to do to fix it. And the entire time, not once did it ever cross my mind, nor was it brought up to me that one of the risks involved in this surgery was a surgical site infection. And after the surgery was complete and it was a success and we were relieved, as we were starting to make the transition to get this person out of the hospital, a pretty nasty surgical site infection popped up, and that had never crossed my mind. And to see even just the posture of the medical team that was treating this person change completely to liability and making sure they're covered in every word they said to us was a mind-blowing experience.
So, Aaron, we were talking about how your skill base brought something additional to the table, but you're also bringing a personal experience. And Christian, I thought maybe you could add on to this as far as your skill set and how that contributes to the work that you're doing and your perspective.
Sure. Initially, it's kind of like, all right, this is a job. We need to go in, put a story together, and it feels fairly linear. And then you spend time sitting at a table with people who have invented something, or they work in SPD, and you hear what they're going through every day, and you realize we're just putting a spotlight on someone's life, someone's story, someone's life work sometimes. And I think even to the person doing it, it might almost feel monotonous because they've lived it every day. But then to take it and highlight and pull out the best pieces of that and the struggles and the triumphs, and to get that first person story, or to show how a product can impact people on a massive level. That's what I love to see in the industry, that I think from the outside does seem very simple, like I said before, but it's actually very complex and so incredibly important that you do bring value and attention to the people who are keeping these processes at the highest level that they can be.
So you're talking about the attention to detail. I want to just talk about what it's like trying to film in sterile processing and the operating room, especially being an outsider initially. Like, some of what you had to learn was, what are the do's and don'ts? And we can't act like camera equipment is a common sight in the clean side in sterile processing. Yeah. I'd say it's actually a lot more common in the operating room because they do film procedures, and there are cameras that are used during surgery as well. So maybe not as common as the setup that you're getting going. But what is that like for you, filming and trying to learn all those considerations? And has somebody yelled at you for being either disruptive, or maybe you didn't understand one of the guidelines for the industry and maybe you put yourself in a bad position? And sometimes we have to learn by doing those things.
We were lucky in some ways because we've certainly had some interesting experiences, but the first big shoot we had in an SPD, it was closed off. So we had total control, and we have Lindsay there with us, who is awesome. And from the beginning, she had prepped us really well, and we had control, and we weren't stepping all over people's toes. So that by the time we were working in a live SPD, we at least weren't like total rookies. We had just like a little hint of experience under our belts at that point.
Yeah, I think the difference between having that closed off, but then being there and us at that point realizing how important it is that everything is sterile. Everything that we're bringing in is sterile. And whether it's bunny suits, head covers, I'm always having to remember my beard cover at this point, even if I've got what I think is very little facial hair, but making sure that we're not having someone tell us what we need to do over and over again so that we don't frustrate them as they're still doing their job.
And Justin, I'm just remembering too, you are part of one of our funnier experiences that we can decide whether or not we use this in post. But
No, have at it.
So when we showed up to a shoot at an SPD, we realized pretty quickly that no one wanted us in their SPD because, first of all, they were very busy. And second of all, it really didn't have that much to do with them directly. So I don't blame them one bit. And then you came in and bought everybody pizza and gave them a pep talk and really encouraged them about what a great job they were doing and totally changed the temperature of the room for us so we could get our shot finished.
You know, I think part of it is here's a department that's been underappreciated for so long. And so if I were working in sterile processing, I would have felt intruded upon. And maybe I was like, oh, you know, here it is again. And the idea is to just let people know, like, we're doing this for a good reason. We want people to see what happens in this department. We want you to get recognized, and we're doing it through this vehicle. And then obviously, thank you for allowing us to come in and disrupt your day to day and show that appreciation. And so I know there's a lot of people who work in the departments every single day. And I can tell you, oftentimes it's like the OR gets the bagels and the donuts, and then sterile processing gets the tray dumped on them at the last minute. And so as vendors are listening to this conversation, maybe ones that spend more time in the OR but have taken an interest in the content that we're producing, it's always good to encourage everybody to also say thank you to sterile processing because they're making it happen behind the scenes, and they're commonly less likely to get that recognition and appreciation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Christian talked about realizing our work is putting a spotlight on this incredible job that people are doing and hopefully re-inspiring them, that saying your job makes a difference, we see you. And Justin, you do a great job of making people feel seen, and we've learned a lot just by being on sets with you guys and the Beyond Clean team.
So I can definitely hear the passion here. What are some of the projects that you have in the pipeline that you're really excited about? Like, what is the future for you guys and Beyond Clean that gets the blood pressure pumping?
Man, there are a ton of opportunities, I think, for video-based content in this industry. And just for one example, I think in-service videos, from what we've seen, there is a lot of room to add interest and excitement within the in-service video realm. And taking something that's viewed as almost an afterthought and using it to reinforce to the end users watching the video that they're learning about an innovative and exciting piece of equipment that this company spent countless hours perfecting. It's not an easy task, but we talk about how little you can actually control about your own products once they hit the market. You can't control how it's used every day. You can't control what people say about it online, but you can control what you communicate about it. And I think that companies and ultimately patient safety can really benefit from consistent and clear and engaging content. And it doesn't hurt if it's also cinematic and beautiful at the same time.
Well, you know what? You make a really good point. Much of what we're doing is educating folks. And I think the way people are educated, especially with just how powerful the internet now is, needs to change. And people want to learn and be entertained at the same time.
Yeah.
So can you offer some advice around how to do that well?
Yeah, I think the video content especially gives you a chance to really curate your message. And just like a teacher in college can inspire their students, companies can inspire their users and even their own sales team by putting things out there that really teach well and really communicate well. It can be the difference of someone scrolling right by or taking the time to watch and really learn what a company is all about or a certain subject or anything that needs to be communicated.
That's a great point, Christian. You just got me thinking about the nature of us working as part of the Beyond Clean team means that we've worked with a handful of really innovative and disruptive companies who a big part of what they're doing is trying to get out this clear message amidst maybe some misinformation or whatever might be out there. And why I think that's important and why I bring it up is because another thing we've learned with working with you all is that without innovation and without disrupting, this industry cannot move forward. It cannot move forward to better patient safety, which at the end of the day is always at the top of the pyramid. If it always stayed the way it was, this industry would look very different. And I know there are certain voices that want things to stay the same, and there's other voices that are saying, let's push this thing forward, and it's a good balance of safety and innovation. But particularly without that innovation, it seems like we're selling ourselves short.
Well, you bring up a great point about communication, and I think one of the biggest things that's lacking in our industry is there's a lot of good communication that's going out, but it's not being put in a format that enables the listener to be receptive to it. So what is it about video content then that is so different that enables the listener to be able to just absorb the material better? I mean, that's one of the things that really pushed the podcast forward, was that prior to doing this, almost all content was written. And then we start doing the podcast and it just immediately resonates with people. And now we're moving into video. So what is it about video that makes it so compelling to make people want to listen to the message?
Yeah, so you can bring in elements that can help emote the message, right? It's the difference of, like you were saying, Mike, about just reading something and then hearing a voice and then being able to see that voice and then be able to create a feeling around it too. And I think that's just the different levels of impact that you can bring to someone. Creating an environment for someone to really feel what the initial writer of a thought is trying to convey in the best way possible.
Yeah, and Christian and I were just talking today about places we see that we can move things forward with content within the sterile processing industry. You know, on YouTube, when you click on a video, but then you have to watch the ad, and after 5 seconds, you can skip it. I've seen recently some ads where they've really perfected a 5-second video. I saw one that was for diapers where they went bam, 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 and in 3 shots, it's easy on, easy off into the diaper pail. That's just one example of the many that we're really excited about exploring within this space. Like you mentioned, Justin, we've been living in this space for the last few years, almost exclusively, and then partnered with the expertise with the rest of the Beyond Clean team. You're talking about, instead of hiring a marketing firm or an ad firm that doesn't work within the sterile processing space, you're hiring a team of experts who understand to an incredible depth the nuance of the sterile processing industry, and a production team that's been working in that space almost exclusively for the past 3 years. It's really exciting to be thinking about all of the different ways that we can enhance the messages of different companies who are bringing innovation and disruptive technology into this space.
All right, awesome. We're pretty much at the end of the interview, but I want to ask each of you one question before we wrap.
Is it who's our favorite Beyond Clean member?
Well, it's Lindsay, let's be honest.
Okay,
all right,
two questions. Yeah, 2 questions.
Sorry. No, we're going to skip that one. No. So the question is, we filmed 2 episodes of Beyond the Tour. Everybody can find that on the YouTube page. It was a ton of fun. We've improved our process for filming and everything else along the way. But in those 2 episodes, I want to hear from each of you. What was the funniest or most memorable moment of filming from the, and I guess, Christian, you were deathly sick on the second filming, so you might have to call out the first episode, but that's not my favorite memory. I'm sure it's not yours, but what is your funniest moment or most memorable moment from the filming of those 2 episodes to date?
So leading up to the first project that we did together, we had only had phone conversations, and I might have seen a picture of Justin. I guess we had met Hank before, but we got into town, and then real late we're driving to where we were staying that night, which was an Airbnb that we were all going to stay in for the next couple of days together, as we kind of put our feet to the fire and spent time just like talking and getting to know each other, and then saying goodnight and all going to our separate rooms in the same little Airbnb just to wake up and kind of, all right, hey, like we're all here together and really get to know each other. But it was such a fun time to just be in that confined space. And I remember Justin pelting John Evans, one of our videographers, about every question that he had ever had about videography, and John just loving every moment of it.
Man, I'm thinking about, we've been run and gun, and Justin, you kind of mentioned that there was some sickness floating around on the second Beyond the Tour filming. So we were run and gun super hard, and we got through with filming at a home, this casual conversation of the teams. And Chuck from IST, he kind of wanders over, and he's just a super friendly guy. We loved hanging with him. And he starts opening up about all the things he's done. One of them is being a tour manager. And so this guy starts dropping on us that, oh, yeah, I tour managed for the Rolling Stones and Backstreet Boys and Jimmy Buffett. We're trying to pack stuff up. We just stopped for about 15 minutes and let him tell us all of his stories about being on the road with bands.
Well, being that you've been on the road with your band, I could see where you wanted to give that even more time.
Oh, yeah.
Both of them were really fun to record, and both companies were very hospitable and really welcomed us in, and it was a ton of fun. I'll go ahead and add my favorite moment, which you guys gave me as a gift for my birthday, which was trying to record. Both of my most memorable moments from each filming come from trying to do the 5-second intro take where I was at the top of the road entering into the Anderson facilities and just not being able to get the words out. You guys forgot your teleprompter, so I won't let you forget that. So that didn't help for my very first time. And then also when we were in front of the Wright Brothers Museum in Dayton, it was super cold. We picked the worst day right at the very end, and I'm huddling in the vehicle just trying to stay warm enough to get the 2 minutes out. But you did remember the teleprompter, which was a huge save for me in take number 2. So
the first one that you were talking about, where we were positioned on the one road that went in and out of the company, and we started as everyone was leaving work for the day. So not only were we against ourselves without the teleprompter, but every about 3 minutes we had a different car coming by.
And then the plane overhead, which was the best outtake of the video, the outtake video that you put together for me. So
the uncensored video.
The uncensored video, absolutely. And the uncensored one is not the one that was made public, so text me. I'll send you the real one. You guys have been a pleasure to work with. We've done some really great work. I'm looking forward to innovating more in the educational space and doing different types of content and just continuing to drive the sterile processing industry forward. I'm glad you found a passion for it. Definitely have created a niche. And you're a pleasure to work with. And I know the feedback from when we've been on site to film has been very positive about how much fun you're to be around while you're trying to do something somewhat stressful for people that definitely aren't used to being on film. So, Aaron, thanks a lot for coming on for this interview.
Man, thank you. We love and appreciate you guys.
And Christian, you too, man. Really appreciate you coming on and telling our listening audience more about the work that we're doing.
Of course, anytime.
That was the Ankrum brothers, Aaron and Christian, producers with Beyond Clean Media. And Mike, the work that we've done with these two has been some of the most innovative work with Beyond the Tour. I'm so proud of that project. And I think it's great to have this opportunity to introduce them, and largely they're behind the camera, behind the scenes, to the listeners, but also tie it to a couple of major focuses that we have that we think is going to have a great deal of impact on sterile processing. Number one, creating content that is educating the industry in a more engaging way, in a new and different way, and then also raising the profile of the sterile processing industry, not only in the U.S., but around the globe.
Yeah, and wouldn't the irony be that in an effort to bring a industry out of the behind the scenes of the very popular OR, that if we didn't give our behind the scenes people a chance to have their moment to shine and say, here's who we are, here's what we do. Because I think that this skill set that they're bringing to our team is so critical for not just getting sterile processing out there, but also capturing another way of communicating this critical message in a way that people are going to respond to. So they just fit with us, and I love it.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Mike and myself, thank you for listening to this week's edition of Beyond Clean.